Chapter 4. The Hall. I am right against my house, seat of my ancestors, Yorkshire tragedy. Rookwood Place was a fine, old, irregular pile of considerable size, presenting a rich, picturesque outline with its innumerable gable ends, its fantastical coigns and tall crest of twisted chimneys. There was no uniformity of style about the building, yet the general effect was pleasing and beautiful. Its very irregularity constituted a charm. Nothing except convenience had been consulted in its construction. Additions had from time to time been made to it, but everything dropped into its proper place, and, without apparent effort or design, grew into an ornament, and heightened the beauty of the whole. It was, in short, one of those glorious manorial houses that sometimes unexpectedly greet us in our wanderings, and gladden us like the discovery of a hidden treasure. Some such ancestral hall we have occasionally encountered in unlooked-for quarters in our native county of Lancaster, or in its smiling sistershire, and never without feelings of intense delight, rejoicing to behold the freshness of its antiquity and the greenness of its old age. Be it observed in passing, a Cheshire or Lancashire hall, time-honoured though it be, with its often renovated black and white squares, fancifully filled up with trefoils and quatrefoils, rosettes and other figures, seems to bear its years so lightly that its age, so far from detracting from its beauty, only lends it a grace. And the same mansion, to all outward appearance, fresh and perfect as it existed in the days of good Queen Bess, may be seen in admirable preservation in the days of the youthful Victoria. Such is Bramall, such Morton, and many another we might instance. The former of these houses may perhaps be instanced as the best specimen of its class, and its class, in our opinion, is the best. To be met with in Cheshire, considered with reference either to the finished decoration of its exterior, rich in the checkered colouring we have alluded to, preserved with a care and neatness almost Dutch, or to the consistent taste exhibited by its possessor to the restoration and maintenance of all its original and truly national beauty within doors. As an illustration of old English hospitality, that real, hearty hospitality for which the squirearchy of this country was once so famous. Ah, why have they bartered it for other customs less substantially English? It may be mentioned that a road conducted the passenger directly through the great hall of this house, literally of entertainment, where, if he listed, strong ale and other refreshments, awaited his acceptance and courted his stay. Well might old King, the Cheshire historian, in the pride of his honest heart, exclaim, "I know divers men, who are but farmers, that in their housekeeping may compare with a lord, or baron, in some countries beyond the seas. Yea, although I named a higher degree, I were able to justify it. We have no such golden farmers in these degenerate days." The mansion was originally built by Sir Ranulph de Rookwood, or, as it was then written, Rookwood, the first of the name, a stout Yorkist who flourished in the reign of Edward IV, and received the fair domain and broad lands upon which the edifice was raised, from his sovereign in reward for good service, retiring thither in the decline of life at the close of the Wars of the Roses, to sequestrate himself from scenes of strife, and to consult his spiritual weal in the erection and endowment of the neighbouring church. It was of mixed architecture, and combined the peculiarities of each successive era. Retaining some of the sterner features of earlier days, the period ere yet the embattled manor house peculiar to the reigns of the later Henrys had been merged into the graceful and peaceable hall. The residence of the Rookwoods had early anticipated the gentler characteristics of a later day, though it could boast little of that exuberance of external ornament, luxuriance of design, and prodigality of beauty, which, under the sway of the Virgin Queen, distinguished the residence of the wealthier English landowner, and rendered the Hall of Elizabeth, properly so called, the pride and boast of our domestic architecture. The site selected by Sir Ranulph for his habitation had been already occupied by a vast fabric of oak, which he in part removed, though some vestiges might still be traced of that ancient pile. A massive edifice succeeded, with gate and tower, court and moat complete, substantial enough, one would have thought, to have endured for centuries. But even this ponderous structure grew into disuse, and Sir Ranulph's successors, remodelling, repairing, almost rebuilding the whole mansion, in the end so metamorphosed its aspect that at last little of its original and distinctive character remained. Still, as we said before, it was a fine old house, though some changes had taken place for the worse, which could not be readily pardoned by the eye of taste, as, for instance, the deep embayed windows had dwindled into modernised casements of lighter construction. The wide porch, with its flight of steps leading to the great hall of entrance, had yielded to a narrow door, and the broad quadrangular court was succeeded by a gravel drive. Yet, despite all these changes, the house of the Rookwoods, for an old house, and, after all, what is like an old house, was no undesirable or uncongenial abode for any worshipful country gentleman who had a great estate. The hall was situated near the base of a gently declining hill, terminating a noble avenue of limes, and partially embosomed in an immemorial wood of the same timber, which had given its name to the family that dwelt amongst its rook-haunted shades. Descending the avenue at the point of access afforded by a road that wound down the hillside towards a village distant about half a mile, as you advanced, the eye was first arrested by a singular octagonal turret of brick, of more recent construction than the house, and, in all probability, occupying the place where the gateway stood of yore. This tower rose to a height corresponding with the roof of the mansion, and was embellished on the side facing the house with a flamingly gilt dial, peering, like an impudent observer, at all that passed within doors. 2 apartments, which it contained, were appropriated to the house porter. Despoiled of its martial honours, the gateway still displayed the achievements of the family, the rook and the fatal branch, carved in granite, which had resisted the storms of 2 centuries, though stained green with moss and mapped over with lichens. To the left, overgrown with ivy, and peeping from out a tuft of trees, appeared the hoary summit of a dovecot, indicating the near neighbourhood of an ancient barn, contemporary with the earliest dwelling house, and of a little world of offices and outbuildings, buried in the thickness of the foliage. To the right was the garden, the pleasaunce of the place, formal, precise, old-fashioned, artificial, yet exquisite. For one, commend us to the bygone beautiful English garden, really a garden, not that mixture of park, meadow and wilderness, brought up to one's very windows, which, since the days of the innovators, Kent and his bold associates, Capability Brown and Co., has obtained so largely, this was a garden. There might be seen the stately terraces, such as Watteau, and our own Wilson, in his earlier works, painted, the trim alleys exhibiting all the triumphs of Topiarian art, the sidelong walls of shaven yew, the holly's prickly arms, trimmed into high arcades, the tonsile box, wove in mosaic mode of many a curl, around the figured carpet of the lawn, the gayest of parterres and greenest of lawns, with its admonitory sundial, its marble basin in the centre, its fountain, and conched water god. The quaint summer house, surmounted with its gilt vane, the statue, glimmering from out its covert of leaves, the cool cascade, the urns, the bowers, and 100 luxuries besides, suggested and contrived by art to render nature most enjoyable and to enhance the recreative delights of home out of doors, for such a garden should be, with least sacrifice of indoor comfort and convenience. When Epicurus to the world had taught that pleasure was the chiefest good, and was perhaps the right, if rightly understood, his life he to his doctrine brought, and in his garden's shade that sovereign pleasure sought. All these delights might once have been enjoyed, but at the time of which we write, this fair garden was for the most part a waste, ill-kept and unregarded. The gay parterres were disfigured with weeds. Grass grew on the gravel walk. Several of the urns were overthrown. The hour upon the dial was untold. The fountain was choked up, and the smooth-shaven folieux lawn only rescued, it would seem, from the general fate that it might answer the purpose of a bowling green, as the implements of that game, scattered about, plainly testified. Diverging from the garden to the house, we have before remarked that the more ancient and characteristic features of the place had been, for the most part, destroyed, less by the hand of time than to suit the tastes of different proprietors. This, however, was not so observable in the eastern wing, which overlooked the garden. Here might be discerned many indications of its antiquity. The strength and solidity of the walls, which had not been, as elsewhere, masked with brickwork, the low Tudor arches, the mullioned bars of the windows, all attested its age. This wing was occupied by an upper and lower gallery, communicating with suites of chambers, for the most part deserted, excepting one or two, which were used as dormitories, and another little room on the ground floor, with an oriel window opening upon the lawn, and commanding the prospect beyond, a favourite resort of the late Sir Piers. The interior was curious for his honeycomb ceiling, deeply moulded in plaster, with the arms and alliances of the Rookwoods. In the centre was the royal blazon of Elizabeth, who had once honoured the hall with a visit during a progress, and whose cipher ER was also displayed upon the immense plate of iron which formed the fire grate. To return, for a moment, to the garden, which we linger about as a bee around a flower. Below the lawn there was another terrace, edged by a low balustrade of stone, commanding a lovely view of park, water and woodland. High-hanging woods waved in the foreground, and an extensive sweep of flat champaign country stretched out to meet a line of blue, hazy hills bounding the distant horizon. Chapter 5. Sir Reginald Rookwood. A king who changed his wives as easily as a woman changes her dress. He threw aside the first, cut off the second's head, the third he disemboweled. As for the fourth, he pardoned her, and simply turned her out of doors, but to make matters even, cut off the head of number 5. Victor Hugo. Marie Tudor. From the house to its inhabitants, the transition is natural. Besides the connection between them, there were many points of resemblance, many family features in common. There was the same melancholy grandeur, the same character of romance, the same fantastical display. Nor were the secret passages, peculiar to the one, wanting to the history of the other. Both had their mysteries. One blot there was in the otherwise proud escutcheon of the Rookwoods that dimmed its splendour and made pale its pretensions. Their sun was eclipsed in blood from its rising to its meridian, and so it seemed would be its setting. This foul reproach attached to all the race. None escaped it. Traditional rumours were handed down from father to son throughout the county, and, like all other rumours, had taken to themselves wings and flown abroad. Their crimes became a byword. How was it they escaped punishment? How came they to evade the hand of justice? Proof was ever wanting. Justice was ever baffled. They were a stern and stiff-necked people of indomitable pride and resolution, with, for the most part, force of character sufficient to enable them to breast difficulties and dangers that would have overwhelmed ordinary individuals. No quality is so advantageous to its possessor as firmness, and the determined energy of the Rookwoods bore them harmless through a sea of trouble. Besides, they were wealthy, lavish even to profusion, and gold will do much if skillfully administered. Yet, despite all this, a dark, ominous cloud settled over their house, and men wondered when the vengeance of heaven, so long delayed, would fall and consume it. Possessed of considerable landed property, once extending over nearly half the West Riding of Yorkshire, the family increased in power and importance for an uninterrupted series of years, until the outbreak of that intestine discord which ended in the civil wars, when the espousal of the royalist party, with sword and substance, by Sir Ralph Rookwood, the then lord of the mansion, a dissolute, depraved personage, who, however, had been made a Knight of the Bath at the coronation of Charles I, ended in his own destruction at Naseby and the wreck of much of his property, a loss which the gratitude of Charles II on his restoration did not fail to make good to Sir Ralph's youthful heir, Reginald. Sir Ralph Rookwood left two sons, Reginald and Alan. The fate of the latter was buried in obscurity. It was even a mystery to his family. He was, it was said, a youth of much promise and of gentle manners, who, having made an imprudent match from jealousy or some other motive, deserted his wife and fled his country. Various reasons were assigned for his conduct. Amongst others, it was stated that the object of Alan's jealous suspicions was his elder brother, Reginald, and that it was the discovery of his wife's infidelity in this quarter which occasioned his sudden disappearance with his infant daughter. Some said he died abroad, others that he had appeared again for a brief space at the Hall. But all now concurred in a belief of his decease. Of his child nothing was known. His inconstant wife, after enduring for some years the agonies of remorse, abandoned by Sir Reginald and neglected by her own relatives, put an end to her existence by poison. This is all that could be gathered of the story, or the misfortunes of Alan Rookwood. The young Sir Reginald had attended Charles in the character of page during his exile, and if he could not requite the devotion of the son by absolutely reinstating the fallen fortunes of the father, the monarch could at least accord him the fostering influence of his favour and countenance, and bestow upon him certain lucrative situations in his household as an earnest of his goodwill. And thus much he did. Remarkable for his personal attractions in youth, it is not to be wondered at that we should find the name of Reginald Rookwood recorded in the scandalous chronicles of the day, as belonging to a cavalier of infinite address and discretion, matchless wit and marvellous pleasantry, and eminent beyond his peers for his successes with some of the most distinguished beauties who ornamented that brilliant and voluptuous court. A career of elegant dissipation ended in matrimony. His first match was unpropitious. Foiled in his attempts upon the chastity of a lady of great beauty and high honour, he was rash enough to marry her. Rash, we say, for from that fatal hour all became as darkness. The curtain fell upon the comedy of his life, to rise to tragic horrors. When passion subsided, repentance awoke, and he became anxious for deliverance from the fetters he had so heedlessly imposed on himself and on his unfortunate dame. The hapless lady of Sir Reginald was a fair and fragile creature, floating on the eddying current of existence, and hurried in destruction as the summer gossamer is swept away by the rude breeze and lost forever. So beautiful, so gentle was she, that if sorrow had not made sorrow more beautiful than beauty's self, it would have been difficult to say whether the charm of softness and sweetness was more to be admired than her faultless personal attractions. But when a tinge of melancholy came, saddening and shading the once smooth and smiling brow, when tears dimmed the blue beauty of those deep and tenderic eyes, when hot, hectic flushes supplied the place of healthful bloom, and despair took possession of her heart, then was it seen what was the charm of Lady Rookwood, if charm that could be called, which was a saddening sight to see, and melted the beholder's soul within him. All acknowledged that, exquisite as she had been before, the sad, sweet lady was now more exquisite still. 7 moons had waned and flown, 7 bitter, tearful moons, and each day Lady Rookwood's situation claimed more soothing attention at the hand of her lord. About this time, his wife's brother, whom he hated, returned from the Dutch wars. Struck with his sister's altered appearance, he readily divined the cause. Indeed, all tongues were eager to proclaim it to him. Passionately attached to her, Lionel Vavasour implored an explanation of the cause of his sister's griefs. The bewildered lady answered evasively, attributing her woebegone looks to any other cause than her husband's cruelty, and pressing her brother, as he valued her peace, her affection, never to allude to the subject again. The fiery youth departed. He next sought out his brother-in-law and taxed him sharply with his inhumanity, adding threats to his upbraidings. Sir Reginald listened silently and calmly. When the other had finished, with a sarcastic obeisance, he replied, "Sir, I am much beholden for the trouble you have taken in your sister's behalf, but when she entrusted herself to my keeping, she relinquished, I conceive, all claim on your guardianship. However, I thank you for the trouble you have taken, but for your own sake, I would venture to caution you against a repetition of interference like the present. And I, sir, caution you. See that you give heed to my words, or, by the heaven above us, I will enforce attention to them. You will find me, sir, as prompt at all times to defend my conduct as I am unalterable in my purposes. Your sister is my wife. What more would you have? Were she a harlot, you should have her back, and welcome. The tool is virtuous. Devise some scheme, and take her with you hence. So you rid me of her, I am content." Rookwood, you are a villain. And Vavasour spat upon his brother's cheek. Sir Reginald's eyes blazed. His sword started from its scabbard. "Defend yourself!" he exclaimed, furiously attacking Vavasour. Pass after pass was exchanged. Fierce thrusts were made and parried. Feint and appeal, the most desperate and dexterous, were resorted to. Their swords glanced like lightning flashes. In the struggle, the blades became entangled. There was a moment's cessation. Each glanced at the other with deadly, inextinguishable hate. Both were admirable masters of the art of defence. Both were so brimful of wrath as to be regardless of consequences. They tore back their weapons. Vavasor's blade shivered. He was at the mercy of his adversary, an adversary who knew no mercy. Sir Reginald passed his rapier through his brother's body. The hilt struck against his ribs. Sir Reginald's ire was kindled, not extinguished, by the deed he had done. Like the tiger, he had tasted blood. Like the tiger, he thirsted for more. He sought his home. He was greeted by his wife. Terrified by his looks, she yet summoned courage sufficient to approach him. She embraced his arm. She clasped his hand. Sir Reginald smiled. His smile was cutting as his dagger's edge. "What ails you, sweetheart?" said he. "I know not. Your smile frightens me." "My smile frightens you, fool. Be thankful that I frown not." "Oh, do not frown. Be gentle, my Reginald, as you were when first I knew you. Smile not so coldly, but as you did then, that I may for one instant dream you love me." "Silly wench. There, I do smile." "That smile freezes me. Oh, Reginald, could you but know what I have endured this morning on your account. My brother Lionel has been here." "Indeed?" "Nay, look not so. He insisted on knowing the reason of my altered appearance." "And no doubt you made him acquainted with the cause. You told him your version of the story." "Not a word, as I hope to live." "A lie." "By my truth, no." "A lie, I say. He avouched it to me himself." "Impossible! He could not, would not disobey me." Sir Reginald laughed bitterly. "He would not, I am sure, give utterance to any scandal," continued Lady Rookwood. "You say this, but to try me, do you not? Ha! What is this? Your hand is bloody. You have not harmed him? Whose blood is this?" "Your brother spat upon my cheque. I have washed out the stain," replied Sir Reginald coldly. "Then it is his blood!" shrieked Lady Rookwood, pressing her hand shuddering before her eyes. "Is he dead?" Sir Reginald turned away. "Stay!" she cried, exerting her feeble strength to retain him, and becoming white as ashes. "Abide and hear me. You have killed me, I feel, by your cruelty. I am sinking fast. Dying, I who loved you, only you, yes, one besides, my brother, and you have slain him. Your hands are dripping in his blood, and I have kissed them, have clasped them. And now," continued she, with an energy that shook Sir Reginald, "I hate you, I renounce you forever. May my dying words ring in your ears on your deathbed, for that hour will come. You cannot shun that. Then think of him. Think of me." "Away!" interrupted Sir Reginald, endeavouring to shake her off. "I will not away. I will cling to you, will curse you. My unborn child shall live to curse you, to requite you, to visit my wrongs on you and yours. Weak as I am, you shall not cast me off. You shall learn to fear even me." "I fear nothing living, much less a frantic woman." "Fear the dead, then." There was a struggle, a blow, and the wretched lady sank, shrieking upon the floor. Convulsions seized her. A mother's pain succeeded fierce and fast. She spoke no more, but died within the hour, giving birth to a female child. Eleanor Rookwood became her father's idol, her father's bane. All the love he had to bestow was centred in her. She returned it not. She fled from his caresses. With all her mother's beauty, she had all her father's pride. Sir Reginald's every thought was for his daughter, for her aggrandizement, in vain. She seemed only to endure him, and while his affection waxed stronger and entwined itself round her alone, she withered beneath his embraces, as the shrub withers in the clasping folds of the parasite plant. She grew towards womanhood. Suitors thronged around her, gentle and noble ones. Sir Reginald watched them with a jealous eye. He was wealthy, powerful, high in royal favour, and could make his own election, he did so. For the first time Eleanor promised obedience to his wishes. They accorded with her own humour. The day was appointed. It came. But with it came not the bride. She had fled, with the humblest and the meanest of the pretenders to her hand, with one upon whom Sir Reginald supposed she had not deigned to cast her eyes. He endeavoured to forget her, and, to all outward seeming, was successful in the effort. But he felt that the curse was upon him. The undying flames scorched his heart. Once, and once only, they met again, in France, whither she had wandered. It was a dread encounter, terrible to both, but most so to Sir Reginald. He spoke not of her afterwards. Shortly after the death of his first wife, Sir Reginald had made proposals to a dowager of distinction, with a handsome jointure, one of his early attachments, and was, without scruple, accepted. The power of the family might then be said to be at its zenith, and but for certain untoward circumstances and the growing influence of his enemies, Sir Reginald would have been elevated to the peerage. Like most reformed spendthrifts, he had become proportionately avaricious, and his mind seemed engrossed in accumulating wealth. In the meantime, his second wife followed her predecessor, dying, it was said, of vexation and disappointment. The propensity to matrimony, always a distinguishing characteristic of the Rookwoods, largely displayed itself in Sir Reginald. Another dame followed, equally rich, younger and far more beautiful than her immediate predecessor. She was a prodigious flirt, and soon set her husband at defiance. Sir Reginald did not condescend to expostulate. It was not his way. He effectually prevented any recurrence of her indiscretions. She was removed, and with her expired Sir Reginald's waning popularity. So strong was the expression of odium against him that he thought it prudent to retire to his mansion in the country, and there altogether seclude himself. One anomaly in Sir Reginald's otherwise utterly selfish character was uncompromising devotion to the House of Stuart, and shortly after the abdication of James II, he followed that monarch to Saint-Germain, having previously mixed largely in secret political intrigues, and only returned from the French court to lay his bones with those of his ancestry in the family vault at Rookwood. Chapter 6. Sir Piers Rookwood. My old master kept a good house, and 20 or 30 tall sword and buckler men about him, and in faith his son differs not much. He will have metal too, though he has no store of cutler's blades. He will have plenty of vintner's pots. His father kept a good house for honest men, his tenants that brought him in part, and his son keeps a bad house, with knaves that help to consume all. 'Tis but the change of time. Why should any man repine at it? Crickets, good, loving, and lucky worms were wont to feed, sing, and rejoice in the father's chimney. And now carrion crows build in the son's kitchen. Wilkins. Miseries of enforced marriage. Sir Reginald died, leaving issue 3 children. A daughter, the before-mentioned Eleanor, who, entirely discountenanced by the family, had been seemingly forgotten by all but her father, and 2 sons by his third wife. Reginald, the eldest, whose military taste had early procured him the command of a company of horse, and whose politics did not coalesce with those of his sire, fell, during his father's lifetime, at Killiecrankie, under the banners of William. Piers, therefore, the second son, succeeded to the title. A very different character in many respects from his father and brother, holding in supreme dislike courts and courtiers, party warfare, political intrigue, and all the subtleties of Jesuitical diplomacy, neither having any inordinate relish for camps or campaigns, Sir Piers Rookwood yet displayed in early life one family propensity, viz., unremitting devotion to the sex. Among his other mistresses was the unfortunate Susan Bradley, in whom by some he was supposed to have been clandestinely united. In early youth, as has been stated, Sir Piers professed the faith of Rome, but shortly after the death of his beautiful mistress, or wife, as it might be, having quarrelled with his father's confessor Checkley, he publicly abjured his heresies. Sir Piers subsequently allied himself to Maud, only daughter of Sir Thomas Daubeny, the last of a line as proud and intolerant as his own. The tables were then turned. Lady Rookwood usurped sovereign sway over her lord, and Sir Piers, a cipher in his own house, scarce master of himself, much less of his dame, endured an existence so miserable that he was often heard to regret in his cups that he had not inherited, with the estate of his forefathers, the family secret of shaking off the matrimonial yoke when found to press too hardly. At the onset, Sir Piers struggled hard to burst his bondage, but in vain. He was fast fettered, and only bruised himself, like the caged lark, against the bars of his prison house. Abandoning all further effort at emancipation, he gave himself up to the usual resource of a weak mind, debauchery, and drank so deeply to drown his cares that in the end his hale constitution yielded to his excesses. It was even said that remorse at his abandonment of the faith of his fathers had some share in his misery, and that his old spiritual, and, if report spoke truly, sinful adviser, Father Checkley, had visited him secretly at the hall. Sir Piers was observed to shudder whenever the priest's name was mentioned. Sir Piers Rookwood was a good-humoured man in the main, had little of the old family leaven about him, and was esteemed by his associates. Of late, however, his temper became soured, and his friends deserted him, for between his domestic annoyances, remorseful feelings, and the inroads already made upon his constitution by constant inebriety, he grew so desperate and insane in his revels, and committed such fearful extravagances, that even his boon companions shrank from his orgies. Fearful were the scenes between him and Lady Rookwood upon these occasions, appalling to the witnesses, dreadful to themselves. And it was, perhaps, their frequent recurrence that, more than anything else, banished all decent society from the hall.